After 4 days, I was so happy to have a home to live in, a comfortable bed and a beautiful meal, and walking around an ancient city. The architecture in France makes Australian architecture look very pale. It is simply beautiful, and it is hard to believe that where I was standing was once part of Spain, being 1400 kilometres away. Before the terrors of war, I couldn't help but wonder how the ancient city would have looked in earlier times. For just a couple of euros, you can really enjoy the view. And the history of the town?
Arras is a river town being on the Scarpe and Crinchen that's ownership ebbed and flowed just like its rivers. Always militaristic and walled in parts of its history, starting out with Gallo-Roman origin, it was Gallic peoples to surrender to Caesar. The woolen industry dates from the 4th century. The Middle Ages was a period of great material and cultural wealth, when Arras became the English word for tapestry hangings. The fortunes of the town followed those of troubled Artois, and it passed through many hands, being part of Spain over a period before being joined for the last time to France in 1659 by the Treaty of the Pyrenees. A peace treaty in 1435 was signed there by Philip the Good of Burgundy, and Charles VII of France was the birthplace of Robespierre. The French Revolution and both world wars destroyed many of its ancient buildings. The town centers on two arcaded and gabled squares, the Grande and Petite. The citadel still stands today, occupied by the army up until 2009.
One of the historically significant sons of Arras was Maximilien Robespierre. He was born in 1758 and he died in 1794 at the age of 46. He was one of the leaders of the French Revolution, and being best known for spearheading the Reign of Terror. And also he was a prominent member in the Jacobin political party. As you walk around the square, you are greeted by many cafes and restaurants, some of them offering magnificent food. I of course always had a problem with the menu because I just couldn't read it. I'm very partial to fish, and the French word for fish is poisson, and the spelling almost looks like poison. And more than one occasion I tried out the patience of my travelling companion Leap, who said, "Why do you always ask me what I should eat?" I probably should have said to him, "Well, can you please read me the menu in English?" But however, tucked away in a quiet corner is the Église St. John Cathedral. There are so many brilliant cathedrals in Europe, and this one ranks among them. As you stare at the photos around the walls of the brilliant statues and architecture of the building, it is simply magnificent. And tucked away in yet another corner is a magnificent Irish pub, and if you're partial to Guinness as I am, that's the place where you'll find it.
G'day mate, I'd like to know where the pub is.
Tu fais quoi là? Tu fais quoi? What are you doing? Tu fais quoi? En français?
Waiting to get directions to go to the pub.
As you walk through the arch of the citadel, you become very conscious of its history. Arras was first fortified in the 13th century with city walls. These defences were improved in the 16th century by the then Spanish rulers. However, the French took charge of the city in 1640. The citadel was commissioned by King Louis XVI in 1667 and constructed by Van Bron between 1668 and 1672. Like the citadel at Lille, it was constructed as a pentagon star and was intended to protect the French from attack by the then Spanish Netherlands. It was constructed close to the Cryon River, which could both act as a water source for the garrison and help to fill the moats. As with all of his forts, it was constructed on a 1 to 600 scale, and its plans and models were kept top secret but drawn out for training purposes. Many of the models from his forts are still visible in museums in Paris. Changing politics meant that Arras's role as a strategic site diminished. The citadel became known as Belle Intimon, loosely translated as pretty but useless. In World War I, Arras was occupied by the Allies, and by the now dry moats were used to park tanks. In 1917, the battle for Arras, and in 1940, further battles of Arras took place, with the British launching a largely unsuccessful counterattack against the advancing Germans. The moats of the citadel hold a memorial for 218 patriots, members of the French underground, who were shot by a firing squad between 1941 and 1944. The citadel was still used for military purposes up until 2010. The final occupants being the headquarters for the 601 Regiment that had been stationed in Berlin until the fall of the Berlin Wall. I'm not normally an emotional person, but as I walked around the moat of the citadel and saw the plaques of the names of those who were shot by the Germans, I could feel a great sadness. Indeed, the restoration projects after the World Wars must have been incredible. As I did the research for this video, I was shocked at the level of damage that had been done in the city. But as you walk around today, for the most part, the city is in pristine condition. However, you do still find the odd bullet hole in buildings as you walk around, or craters where things have been hit and not yet restored, or maybe even beyond restoration. Within the grounds of the citadel is a church which is said to be one of the oldest of its kind in France. And it's very fitting that there would be a church in a place like this, and the fact that it's been preserved, you can see the photos for yourself. And just down the road from the citadel is a war cemetery, mainly filled by the British, very well cared for, and it dates back to the period of World War I. And as I walked through that cemetery, I had tears in my eyes, and it was quite a harrowing experience. As you run an eye over everything in the citadel, you can see how solidly it was constructed. This is the now visitors centre, but I believe it would have been where the guards were posted at the entrance to the citadel when it was in military use. Before we leave the citadel, we should leave it on a positive note. Today they hold concerts there. Indeed, at the time I was there, they were setting up for a concert. I come across the cemetery quite by accident. Indeed, Leap didn't even know what it was. He thought it was just a cemetery. The brilliant stonework, I believe it may be a marble of sorts, I'm not quite sure of the stone. And I made sure to walk around and check on every gravestone there. It's hard not to get emotional in places like these. You see, just one, many war cemeteries in France. This one happens to be in Arras, and it is decorated by members of the Great War. It is very difficult to see what is great about it, but that was the name that it was then known by. Now, of course, we speak of it as World War I, and I have to admit that my eyes are wet and I feel I'm on hollow ground. One of the little-known tourism features of Arras, in line with its military history, are the Wellington tunnels. Australians are typically known for stealing things from New Zealand, like phar and such things, but in this occasion we'll give the New Zealanders full credit. They would have shortened the war, and they were that useful. They were even used during World War II. In fact, they were lost and not rediscovered until the 1990s. Let's have a look at the historical account.
The Allies had a secret weapon as they faced off against German troops near the town of Arras, France in the spring of 1917. An underground city, hiding supplies and an estimated 24,000 Allied soldiers. More than 18.2 meters or 60 feet below the surface of the city, miles of ancient quarry tunnels snake below the city surface, allowing troops safe shelter from the mayhem above ground, and a way to move in secret across the landscape. Tunnel warfare has been common throughout human history in many parts of the world, and World War I was no exception. However, most tunnels of the Great War were either merely cut and covered trenches barely below the surface of battlefields, or secret passageways under enemy territory, designed for eavesdropping and, occasionally, for detonating gigantic mines. The tunnels under Arras were different. Quarried since the Middle Ages, and possibly as far back as Roman times, the tunnels under Arras provided stone for much of the above ground, building up until the 19th century. Starting in the fall of 1916, expert tunnelers were brought in to expand and connect the ancient passages in preparation for battle. A team of 500 tunnelers were brought in to expand and connect the mine tunnels, led by the New Zealand Tunnelling Company, in taking advantage of experienced British coal miners, as well as the so-called Bantam soldiers, who were of understandard height for a British soldier. Named for the capital of New Zealand, the Wellington quarries were eventually transformed into more than mere tunnels, housing large supply depots and meeting rooms, kitchens, latrines, a hospital and a light rail system. The tunnels were named after New Zealand towns from north to south, so that the tunnelers could easily find their way underground. Used both as shelter and for troop movement during the offensive, the tunnels may have contributed to the success of the battle. Despite heavy losses estimated as high as 158,660 Allied troops and German losses at about 120,000, the surprise attack in April of 1917 was generally considered a tactical success, inching the Allies towards eventual victory. During World War II, the tunnels found new life as air raid shelters for local citizens, before being resealed in 1945, and slowly forgotten until they were rediscovered in 1990. In 2008, the tunnels were opened to the public as part of a new museum dedicated to the memory of those who served in World War I, with special attention given to the tunnelers and soldiers who lived and fought below Arras.
The city and the history of Arras is incredibly impressive, but it would be nothing without its rivers. And to this point I hadn't looked at them. Lee took me down to have a look at them, and on the way down there was this magnificent statue, and just a short distance from it was an artificially made duck pond. It looked absolutely beautiful, a beautiful place to have a picnic or something like that. And further down we went to an area which apparently is going to be used for the Olympics. They're going to do wet water rafting and stuff like that. The rivers are quite well fed. I went on a long walk and they're fed by a massive wetland, and I spotted an old friend along the bank. What we call this in Australia is a stinging nettle. I can tell you a funny story about that. My late granddad went to the toilet in the bush and run out of toilet paper and thought he'd use some leaves, and he chose to use one of these, and apparently he spent the rest of the day in the creek. I knew what it was and asked Lee to confirm what it was, and he informed me that I shouldn't touch it. Further down the river we come across some very robust constructed barges. They would have been essential in the early days for transporting wool and other products up and down the river. And something in Australia I'd never seen before, a lock. A lock adjusts the water level between a higher and lower level. I wasn't lucky enough to see it working, but I was amazed to run an eye over the engineering of it. It's not just boats that look like tanks you find on the waterways. You find pleasure boats also, and I think they can control the flow of the water, and that is why they will be hosting Olympic events there as well. And even today, the streams that feed the moats to the citadel are still visible, although somewhat stagnant. Every day there seemed to be something going on. I couldn't even think of the number of festivals and things that was going on during my stay there.
It's the way with France, you just go around the corner and you're having a fair, and it's not a bad day. It's a sports related fair in Arras. There's rock climbing walls, and you can play chess and various other things.
Even one day there was a marathon.
I find myself in the middle of a marathon. You never know what's going to happen.
That is the way with France. They're masters of wine, they're masters of water, and they're masters of entertainment. And there is of course some bad news. Leap aspires to one day play for Manchester City. I tried to tell him that he was going for the wrong one, but he wouldn't listen. I went to a couple of his training sessions, and it was mostly in French, but I enjoyed them. Well, thank you for watching. I've enjoyed making it. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. Please subscribe, and there is a lot more to come.